I had done this talk years ago, prepped it, and realized that it wasn't finished. And also, I tried to pitch it to like Hackettstown or the local area, Warren County in particular. So that's where I'm going to start. Basically, I'm concerned with, can you hear me now? Yeah. Where's my, there you go. Thank you. Uh, I try to take a look at Hackettstown, Warren County, in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, just a sidebar, Waterloo Village was a farm owned by a man named Smith, Joseph Smith, who was in the 3rd New Jersey Cavalry, the Butterfly Boys. His house is still in Stanhope on the main street, across and diagonally from the Stanhope House. Very wealthy family down there. And people signed up. New Jersey is the only state that didn't have many men drafted or draft riots because people volunteered. So we're going to take a look at the Gilded Age. And the question I have about the Gilded Age is how many people are aware of what it is, what it was, what was going on, and how does the Civil War connect to it? Well, it's post-Civil War, so let's start with that. Mark Twain is the one who called it the Gilded Age. And we'll discover that after the Civil War, all of these things got intertwined and interconnected: the railroads, the generals, the performing arts, the politics are like, if you go back to that era and look at the newspapers and don't read the names, you think you're reading today's. So that is so strange that that should happen. So Mark Twain called it the Gilded Age, gilded or gold on the outside and rotten and empty on the inside. The Gilded Age. So if we take a look at it, I went backwards. I gotta go for it. There it is. Why did the Gilded Age emerge in America after the Civil War? And this is a little quiz to find the word gilded. Well, it means what? Covered with, and this is interactive, by the way. Feel free to jump in or ask a question or whatever. It's much more comfortable that way than as a lecture. That's Boss Tweed from New York on the right. We all know about Boss Tweed and a cartoon done by Morristown's own Thomas Nast, the father of American cartooning. He invented Santa Claus and the Republican elephant. There you go. So he was not a, Boss Tweed was not a savory character, and they felt that Thomas Nast had to move to Morristown because he'd get murdered in New York. He'd be punished. All right. This is probably the prime start of the era and the money making. This is Grand Central Station right after it was built. And it's on 42nd Street. It's still there. It's a beautiful architectural building. But right after the Civil War, the monetary issue started to move people around. And with the onset of the railroad, everybody was able to go west and make money. Now, this is, if you recognize the monument, anyone? It's right up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing is, this thing was taken down. It was destroyed. Eventually, we'll see that. This is a new version of it, but all the monuments come out of a catalog. So if you're driving along, you see a Civil War monument, you're going to see the same guy. He must have been all over. He was in Newton, Hackettstown, Phillipsburg. And they were iron companies to make a lot of money because they put fences up around cemeteries. So this one was taken down, was dedicated in 1896. The monuments were popping up all over the place, and now they're an issue. We got to take them down. We got to take them down, for what they memorialize. Anti-war people, anti-whatever people now. So it's called Billy Yank. Billy Yank comes from the term on the pickets of the Civil War. Billy Yank was a Union marching the picket, and Johnny Reb was across the river, and they would often exchange tobacco or, hey, Johnny Reb, what is it, Billy Yank? So that's how he got that name. The money was raised for the statue was raised by the area school children's monument penny collection, $300. And then the local businesses chipped in $200. Total cost $500. But in those years, the local businesses were often Civil War veterans, even here. It's manufactured by the Fisk Iron Works, Broome Street in New York, and the original statue was iron. It was demolished for the Route 46 to go through. You know, you make that wicked turn there for the monument, that's where the statue was. The metal was sold for junk. Well, in 1998, land donated by the Valley National Bank, 90 feet from the original, restored the statue. And in 2001, it was rededicated and restored. You want to take a look at it. My favorite thing on the statue is, why is the horse's head on one side and the horse's rear on the other? Is that a commentary? Never mind. Now, if you look at it, it memorializes Captain Holt's Company B, 15th New Jersey, from Hackettstown, and General Nathan Kimball's "Remember You Are Jersey Men," December 12th, 1862, at the Battle of Fredericksburg, as they charged up the hill and got slaughtered. These two units, and many of them are buried right across in the cemetery across from the current Presbyterian Church, next to the old Presbyterian Church. You go in there, they're all over the place, buried from these two units. And that church, the old one, I think was closed around the time of the Civil War. Now, both of the statues are originally from the Fisk Iron Work. The one on the left is in Hackettstown. The one on the right is in Brooklyn. Oh, Greenwood. Same guy. And if you go, yeah, Greenwood has a lot of upper echelon Civil War posted. So they were putting monuments up just every place they could. This is the one in Gettysburg, the New York 12th Infantry. They gathered in Gettysburg, collected the money, and then put it to this statue. More on that. Now, this is the one in Phillipsburg. And if you go up to Phillipsburg, you will see these mortars. You can see one on the far right there. There are no more mortars in Phillipsburg than there are at Vicksburg, where these came from. The problem with them is, once you put them there, you can't move them. And at the top of this 48-foot statue stands Colonel Robert McAllister of Oxford Furnace, New Jersey, where he built the railroad tunnel. And there's a little memorial to him there, which got stolen and replaced later on. More on him later. This is the gentleman I've been writing about. This is Carl Schurz of Carl Schurz Park in New York. And he was very active after the Civil War. He was a general in the Civil War. He was a foreign-born senator. He's German-born. And he was a newspaper man in New York City and a muckraker. He was also the Secretary of the Interior, and the Native American issue was dumped on him. Now, they wanted to take this statue down. It's 40 feet high, and it's made from a death mask by a man named Carl Bitter. And these bas-reliefs on the side, one is to commemorate his defender of freedom of the Native American, and one for the African American. Well, they want to take it down because the Native American and the African American are unclothed. That was an excuse. It's beautiful. If you get a chance, it's on Morningside Park, which looks over this vast park beneath him. He was a German-American patriot, and also he was a general, and nobody liked him. And by World War I, with the anti-German feeling, he's been erased from our history. I asked someone, who's Carl Schurz? They said, the guy who drew Peanuts. I said, that's Schultz. But then he would not laugh. And his secretary, this is even more, named Max Schrabisch, who came over here and did a diagram in a book, which I have, of every single Native American village and cave in Warren and Sussex County, including the one down there, which is at the end of the river, I'm told. So, and then the monuments, the ones we all know, up there is Grant's tomb. You remember the old joke? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Yeah, right. And this is the gilt statue. This had in Central Park, had a lot of controversy recently because of regilding it. And this is Franz Siegel. He's on 116th Street, also done by Carl Bitter. These were not heard, but let me back it up. Franz Siegel, we've not heard much about. We know Grant and we know Sherman. Now, remembering the heroes. This was something my family was connected to. These are hand-colored lithographs of the heroes of the Civil War. And note, post-Civil War, and you'll find this out as we go along, this is Confederate and Union. They are not separate. That is Longstreet up there, Grant over here, Lincoln, this is the martyr. And these, what they did is they printed a sheet of paper and then hand-colored it and sold it. I have one on my wall downstairs. Don't know what to do with it. It's Lincoln, probably the only copy. And if you see one in a garage sale, that's not a reproduction, grab it. They go for about $5,000. It's done by my cousin. My dad found him in the phone book, by the way. In the Gilded Age, Charles A. Lubrecht. And he came from Germany, escaping from the revolution over there in the 1840s. He came in 1860 with his bag packed, ready to go into the army, and they told him, no, you have tuberculosis. He never had it, and he couldn't figure that out. And this is a wedding party, a pre-wedding, and it's interesting when you look at it. He's up there with the white beard. This is my beloved Auntie Florence, really my cousin, and her partner holding hands in the picture, and that's, I think, around 1881, which I thought was kind of interesting. She was one of my absolutely favorite relatives. And when I went there one time as a kid, there were 8 older ladies, one with a wig. So I had Auntie Emma, Auntie Mary. I didn't realize it was 4 couples. This is the Confederate generals. We're going to take a look at them now in no order at all. There were so many of them that it's hard to focus on them. But during this particular Gilded Age, I wanted to take a look, whatever happened to, that kind of an approach. Here is Robert E. Lee. Very little is ever said about him. He was at West Point, he's an engineer, and his job during the Mexican War was to blow up walls. He was a munitions specialist. And after the war, and during it, his plantation, his house was taken away from him. Government seized it. Today it is Arlington National Cemetery, and he never got any money back for it. So he was the president of Washington and Lee University. He went to the White House and asked for money for his property. He never got it. His father, Harry Lighthorse Lee, is from Burnsville, New Jersey, right down here. And he is buried in a casket in the university. And after the war, he absolutely refused to go to any military parade or wear a military uniform ever again. And his son moved up to New York. So when I was teaching out here, both at Sussex County College and Passaic, I had 7 descendants of Robert E. Lee. And they're all named Robert E. Lee, by the way. Right?
She was just saying how old he was. He died at 63.
He was pretty old. He had heart problems even while he was during the Civil War. I don't know how old he died, but each descendant is, so we have Robert E. Lee the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and Michelle Lee, who sat next to Elise Lincoln over here, and she was descended from Lincoln's father's brother. So the next one we're going to take a look at is old James Longstreet, old Pete at Gettysburg. How many of you seen the movie Gettysburg? Oh, we're gonna have to show it here. We're gonna have to show that. Music's beautiful, and this is played by Tom Berenger. And Longstreet was connected up here. I think his mother's from Randolphville, New Jersey, and his wife too. After the war, Confederate general, he was turned Republican, and he supported Grant. And under Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the ambassador to Turkey, his wife died, I think, in 1962. And it's amazing how these men went back into government service, even though they were Confederates. This gentleman, General John C. Hood, is kind of sad. He lost the use of his arm at Gettysburg. Then he lost his leg at Chickamauga. He was a cotton broker by trade. And the problem with him is he had the highest casualty rate of anybody in the Confederates. He died of yellow fever in 1879. this is really not a nice guy. Okay, General Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was a lumber merchant, but planned a lot of money, and he founded the Ku Klux Klan. It's not, which I understand is still active up in Oxford. So I've heard. Now, this is Joseph E. Johnson, a very nice man who's the president of the Alabama and Tennessee Railroad. And he comes up north when General Sherman dies to carry Sherman's coffin. And he refuses to wear a hat. And it's raining. And they said, put your hat on. And he said, if I were in his place and he was standing here in mine, he would not put on his hat. And sadly enough, a month later, he dies of pneumonia from a cold he got for carrying Shermans. This is John Singleton Mosby. Supposedly, he was up here in Newton springing somebody out of jail out of the old courthouse, which is still there in Newton. Want to take a look at it. He was another railroad man. The railroad seems to be the key where these generals could make a lot of money. Kurtz, this guy, and quite a few others. This is Joseph Wheeler. He ended up in the United States House of Representatives. And then he was sent to Spain, Cuba, and the Philippines. And how many people have heard of our war in the Philippines in the late 1800s?
Mhm.
Yeah, with where a couple of us, where the American troops slaughtered 4,000 Philippine women and children and people we haven't heard about. Teddy Roosevelt just kind of excused it, sent the guy away, and wanted to put him up on a carton. This is Stan Waddy. He's the only Native American general, but he's a Confederate. And it's really interesting why he was a Confederate. He's a Cherokee, and the Cherokee unit was under him, but Cherokees had slaves, black slaves. And so he went that way. And then he said, my great crime in the world and splendor, I will get into scrapes without intention of any bad motive, which is kind of good. He blundered. And he went on to be a planter, and he died in 1871. This is a sad story, too. The second president assassinated is Garfield, and Garfield was a Civil War officer. Interesting to me, there were 4 presidents assassinated, and Lincoln was the only one who was not military. The other 3 were all in military at some point or other. And he died in Elberon, New Jersey. And people were surrounding him. Again, the journalists from Elberon was the vacation spot for the wealthy Jewish population. Now, during the war, we formed the American Sanitary Commission. Soldiers loved them. After the war, this became the American Red Cross. So all of the war produced this stuff, and of course the Red Cross and the units of salvation or help or support developed during the Gilded Age. Not only the wealthy. The wealthy were doing quite a bit of supporting for hospitals. For example, been to Montefiore Hospital? The guy's not Italian. It's Moses Montefiore, sir. He's Jewish. And he founded this hospital for Hebrew, handicapped, challenged, whatever you want to call it, in New York. Carl Schurz spoke at the groundbreaking on 84th and Avenue A, I think it is. And then they reached a point where they were overcrowded. They want to move to the Bronx. So all the wealthy people in New York City took their limousines, Carnegie, the Strauss brothers, Ottendorfer, and lined the limousines up, took the patients, put them in, and drove them up to the Bronx in a caravan. Which, again, now this is the Union generals. We'll take a look at those gentlemen. Basically, to be a general, you could go to President Lincoln and say, look, I've got a lot of money. I'll recruit a troop. Can I be a general? And you could. We have 3 generals who were, in any order, a murderer, an arsonist, and a womanizer. General Hooker, we all know the women would be in his tent, prostitutes. They'd say, well, who are those women? Oh, those are hookers. And that's where we get the word today. hookers. Butterfield was an arsonist, a murderer. Yeah, he was the arsonist, and Sickles was the murderer. We'll talk about him later. Now, this is General Sherman. He leaves the military. He's a general. He moves. He was a general of the army, and then he moves to 75th Street in New York City. And he did the records that I have read. He was losing his mind, I guess. He kept repeating stories. He didn't remember things. And there's a record of a dinner with Carl Schurz, his friend, with President Garfield, where he just told the same story 4 or 5 times. He just was losing touch. But he was a very popular general. When he was dying, 75th Street was impassable. People were standing outside waiting. And then when his funeral came up, if you look, here is his funeral, one of the longest funerals in New York City, but not as big as Grant's. And Schurz said the eulogy for that, he will be the greatness of this republic he served so well, and his fame will never cease to be prized by a grateful country, and so on. And you can take a look at the coffin with the horses and the whole thing. Look at the crowd back there. This is around 59th Street, I think. Look what I did. Help.
It's still up on the screen. So
What's that?
I don't know. Something's up on the screen.
Well, let's hope.
If you click on the bottom where the little PowerPoint logo is, it might pop up. One of them.
Signal.
Yeah, it looks like that's what you're up to, right? Nope, the other one. Yep, that one.
Thank you.
Happening.
Thank you.
I have no idea. Try clicking the one to the right then. There you go.
There we go. Sorry about that. I could tell you a story about the computer.
I don't know how we got to Sickles, but you passed like 3. There's a bunch of slides that you missed, at least on mine,
Thank you for that.
unless you have a different one than I do. It's up on the screen though.
It's okay.
There you go.
Let's see if this works. So that's Sherman's funeral. It's a foreign computer. Doesn't like me. I got off. I was in Germany last summer, supposed to do a presentation. I got off and my computer died. Nobody told me. They finally did. This has a different keyboard. You can type German stuff. And also, they're hard to find. However, this is Joshua Chamberlain, very, very famous general from the movie Gettysburg. And in the movie Gettysburg, you'll see him at Little Round Top. You've been to Gettysburg? Yeah, Little Round Top. Well, they just discovered that he wasn't alone up there. He's getting all the credit, but he was at Fredericksburg. And at Fredericksburg, he gets shot in one hip and the bullet goes through. And he suffered miserably the rest of his life. He becomes the president of Bowdoin College. And a very respected, you can see him in the right-hand corner, respected general and intellectual over the years. And he was not a happy general. He did suffer. And by the way, when he got shot, he lay on the battlefield overnight. Like to come down. This is McKinley. Now, McKinley was a brevet major. And McKinley, too, was assassinated during his time in the White House. And the problem was his vice president was Teddy Roosevelt. When he was nominated, they said, well, we'll make Teddy Roosevelt your vice president. And the chairman of the nominating committee said, if something happens to McKinley, we have this idiot as president. And if you pick up the papers about Teddy Roosevelt, kind of looks familiar. And Teddy Roosevelt was famous in New York City for banning beer sales on Sunday with the German-Irish population. They had the largest demonstration in history, 30,000 of them turned up, and he shows up protesting that because that's their only day off. So Teddy, who is the second German-speaking president, addresses the crowd, and they finally worked it out. And what was funny during this time, the rich of the Gilded Age could go drink in a restaurant. But if you went into a bar, you could not order a beer. You had to order a beer and a sandwich. Well, the bars got smart. They finally reneged to that, using the same sandwich for several weeks. So you just turn it back in. In fact, one bar had a brick inside two pieces of bread to fool the inspectors. So that McKinley and Garfield had an aide in the White House, Robert Lincoln, who was present at all three assassinations, his father's, Garfield, and McKinley, which is why he never had children. This is our boy, Dan Sickles. Boy, this guy you could write volumes. You all know the Sickles story, how he murdered Francis Scott Key's son? Because, well, that's all we need. He was in New York City. Let's back this up. And at that time in New York, they were contemplating putting a park where Central Park is now. But it had been a Seneca Indian reservation, which they drove off. And then the African Americans who came up from the South looking for work lived there. Well, they got rid of all of them. And he bought all the property around Central Park. Meanwhile, he's dating a 42-year-old woman, Italian, they thought, but he marries her 18-year-old or whatever daughter, never saying how old he is. They go to Washington. He's a senator now. He's important. And he discovers she's having a love affair. And he finds out that if he stays across the street, that she has a little signal. When he leaves, she pulls down the window shade, lover goes inside. So he packs his pistol, goes into the park at noon, across from the White House, knowing Francis Scott Key's son is going to turn up, and points a gun at him and says, you've been seducing my wife. The guy says, what do you want? And he shoots him, kills him in broad daylight in public. Guess what? He has the first dream team stamped in the Secretary of the, Secretary of War, leads the team, and he gets off on temporary insanity. The first man ever to do so. Did he commit the murder? Yes. Years later, he goes to Gettysburg giving tours, and he said, the fence around the Gettysburg Cemetery is from that Washington Park. And he said, this is where I committed murder and got away with it. So, meanwhile, when he goes to Gettysburg, he's very famous for not going where the general ordered and leaving Chamberlain and the boys up on Little Round Top. However, I found a letter from a neighbor of mine in Randolph, and she was raised by a private, and he wrote to his grandson in World War I that Sickles got lost on the way to Gettysburg, and they're walking around, and when they get there, he puts them between the Klingel farmhouse and the peach orchard. Fine. There's snipers in the farmhouse. There's McClaw's division across from him and Confederates on the other side. He's surrounded. Of that group from Randolph, Major Halsey, leading the 11th New Jersey, Major Halsey, who had a general store up here in 125 Main, they get decimated. 90 came out of Randolph, Dover, and 6 went up the hill. And because of Sickles. Meanwhile, Sickles gets his leg shot off with a cannonball. He sends a sergeant back into fire to get his leg and the cannonball. And he's sitting there smoking a cigar in the back of the ambulance and tourniquet. And if you go today, Walter Reed Museum, there's the cannonball in his leg, which he visited every year. That's my leg. So I kept wondering about, what was going on. He was pretty slippery. He raised money, by the way, show you, for the Gettysburg monuments. That's in a bit. Mrs. McClellan, Little Mac from Orange, New Jersey, of all places. And Little Mac is famous because, first of all, he could never make a decision. He became the governor of New Jersey. And he always required Lincoln to sit down if he was photographed with it. Because he was 5'6.5" or something, and Lincoln was 6'4" with the thumb. So there you go. This is little Phil. Now he's about 5'2". Philip Sheridan, who is very famous for the Sheridan's Ride. In fact, that's a cigars or cigarette card memorializing. He's in Virginia riding to Cedar Creek. He rides all night to warn the Union troops there that the Confederates are on the march. He also, after the war, becomes the general of the army when Sherman retires. His claim to fame at Appomattox, he buys the table that they signed the treaty on for 50 gold pieces or whatever, $50 in gold, and gives it to George Armstrong Custer, who's at that point in jail. But can't make that stuff up. And then he comes back up north. He was with the units in Appomattox when Lee surrendered. That's his statue. And the story there is Washington was a modest city, and that's a male stallion horse. So they insisted that it be placed lower so nobody could look up under it. For modesties. This is Franz Siegel. Again. Oh. Okay, that was mine. Franz Siegel was a German refugee from the war, the Revolution of 1848. He served as a tax collector in New York after giving up his general's job during the Civil War. That's his statue there. And he taught in public schools, he taught German and all, but his farm is still in New York. It's Franz Siegel Park, below Yankee Stadium. That was his property. He was in the Mott section of the Bronx, which is now Mott Avenue, is now the Grand Concourse. So he was in his farm is still, it's a little tough to get distracted real quick. All right, this is George Meade. George Gordon Meade. And why is the Barnegat Lighthouse there? Because he built it. He was an engineer who built all the lighthouses around the bottom of New Jersey. He also was a general at Gettysburg, but he also mapped one of the Great Lakes. He was doing all five, but he died early before that. And he was down in Philadelphia, and he was the chief general at Gettysburg. And he's the one that Sickles got into it with. You know why he did well at Gettysburg, interestingly enough? He took a cartographer, a map maker, next to him on his horse and had him map the battlefield before the Confederates got there. So they kind of knew what was going on there. Now, I guess with those maps, they are now, as we speak, redoing the topography of Gettysburg to make it look like it did during the battle. The big issue is the tree huggers, people who don't want the trees taken down, which have grown up since Gettysburg, and leaving the trees that were there during the battle. There's a couple of them with cannonballs in them and so forth. A Meade, he's a very good general. This is Carl Schurz. I spent a lot of time with old Carl. He's a German revolutionary of 1848. He escaped from sure death from the Prussians by crawling down a water drain. He was then commissioned to break his professor out of jail at Spandau, which he did. They end up in England. He marries a lady, a German lady, who was involved with the kindergarten. They moved to Wisconsin, of all places, where his parents were, where she founds the American kindergarten. So Marguerite and Schurz founds the kindergarten. He then becomes a very, very close friend of Lincoln. He used to play the piano when Lincoln wept and over losing his son, rather. So Schurz is finally appointed after the election. He gets Lincoln in the German election. The Republican Party is forming. It's really kind of shattered. He campaigns for Lincoln, the German people, gets the vote, and they become friends. He gets appointed the ambassador to Spain, but he can't go through Germany because he's still wanted for breaking out of jail. So breaking his. You look at this picture on the right, though. Every Civil War general you see, it's all the same horse and hat, it's just different heads. You can see the head is out of proportion, just plunk another head up there. Oh, this is General Willard. Problem in the army, he was 6'2". And when he and Lincoln, what, you can't hear me? Thank you. Have you been waving your hand for a long time? Good. This is Carl Schurz and his lady love, Fanny Chapman. Her father was the governor of Pennsylvania. And if anybody see the Gilded Age on TV, all right, it opens up in Doylestown, PA at the train station. She's from Doylestown. And she goes to New York regularly. She has two sisters she travels with, not two aunts. And I keep wondering if there's a connection. A lot of money. A lot of money. And Schurz's daughters don't want him to get married to her. And so after I guess they were involved for the whole Gilded Age until he died and she left him. But it's her letters that give you the information. Oh, we went over to Tiffany's. Tiffany's was a very strong contributor to charity. And by the way, he also designed the New York Yankee emblem. How about that? It was for a police medal during the Gilded Age. And they said his mansion was out of sight. And these two were connected with Frick, Schurz's best friend, Andrew Carnegie. All the wealthy Jewish people, the Strausses and so forth, they all had migrated to New York. There's some degree of freedom. However, in 1880, we get a wave of anti-Semitism. You could not get a hotel room if you had a Jewish name. And Schurz broke that line for many, many people. He's been accused just, I would say, a month or two ago of being a bigot, an anti-Native American. More about that in a moment, but he was not. It's totally far from the truth. What they wanted was a scapegoat for Carlisle Indian School and so forth. And I'm really upset about it because anytime I want to speak about Schurz, they blow me off. We don't want to know about him. He was so important to our culture. Henry Kissinger said that if he were born here, he'd be president. He was Civil War, civil service reform, anti-imperialist. He wanted to get rid of the spoils system. He was appointed the Secretary of the Interior of the BAs where he had got the Indian problem. This Nast who hated him, showing what are you going to do about the Native Americans? And he said, there's nothing you can do. We have to give them that land back. He inherited it from the army. He also was asked when he was senator to go into the South and see what do we do about the Negro. He came back and said to President Andrew Johnson, give every black man his land, the vote, and citizenship. Johnson wouldn't see him, and after 3 days, chucked his report in a wastebasket. Schurz, being the kind of guy he is, published 100,000 copies and distributed them publicly. That did not win him any friends and lost in the next election. And then with the Native Americans, would the Native Americans name a town after him on their reservation? You go to Schurz, Nevada today, or when he started to fund the national parks, there's a Mount Schurz in Yellowstone, yet Teddy Roosevelt got all the credit. They were friends and enemies off and on. So I think we got a bum deal. And this is O.O. Howard. If you know anything about the Battle of Chancellorsville, that's what I don't know. Yeah, Battle of Chancellorsville, the Germans were accused of running when they were outflanked by Jackson. Well, Schurz goes to Howard's tent and said, the Confederates are going to flank us. They're coming around the right. We're facing this way. Here come 18,000 Confederates. And, oh, I'm sorry, the general's taking a nap. He cannot be disturbed. Goes back, and now he sees the animals coming out of the forest. Rabbits, deer, whatever. Goes back to Howard. No. They're retreating. Can't you see? The Schurz says they're not going south, they're going north. And suddenly he's got 5,000 men and 18,000 Confederates coming at them. So they gallop. By the time he gets back, the men get back to the river. The Herald Tribune has the article that the Germans ran, thanks to the Telegraph and Horace Greeley. It was the same thing then. The media grabbed it. bam, and he couldn't shake that for years. Howard, meanwhile, he was known as the Christian general, old prayer book, or uh-oh Howard. But he had a good heart. He was against slavery. He supported bad treatment of African Americans, and then he donated his house to Howard University, which is the central building on the campus today. So that's Howard. This is our boy here he's local. This is Robert McAllister. That gravestone is in Belvedere. Go to the Belvedere Cemetery. It's got his picture on it. And he had quite the ego. I'm going to tell you the very famous General McAllister Gettysburg milk story. Have you all heard that one? No, okay. He's a very adamant Christian, and the first thing he'll do when he gets to camp is build a chapel. Then they have a Bible study. He doesn't want his men to drink, so he's nicknamed Mother McAllister. And he's a teetotaler. He will drink nothing. He gets to Gettysburg, and the 11th New Jersey, if you remember, gets stuck between all the Confederates. And the first one to go down, McAllister, with a cannonball, which is still in Rutgers. They carry him off. Then Captain Kearney said, what a beautiful day for a battle. He gets shot, leaving only poor old Major Halsey, now at Hackettstown, New Jersey, in charge of the 11th. Well, they take McAllister into the hospital, lay him down, say, this is going to be going to be painful. You have a shot of whiskey. Oh, no. No drop of whiskey shall pass these lips. So they take it over to the side. They pour it into a canteen of milk. Well, then, General, have some milk. And he drinks it. And for the rest of his life, he said, the Gettysburg milk was the best I ever had. That's a very famous Civil War McAllister story. He returns home. He's from McAllister, Pennsylvania. He built the railroad tunnel up by Shippen Manor here in Oxford. And actually, they stole his sign at one point. And then he put this monument up there. Also in that cemetery is Colonel Robeson of the 3rd New Jersey Cavalry and his crooked brother, William Robeson, who absconded with $100,000 when he was Secretary of the Navy. Money was important. This is General Grant, and it's a tragic story. Grant never could handle any money. Nothing. His wife, Julia, was a piece of work, to tell you the truth. She and Mary Lincoln did not get along. She thought, Mary Lincoln thought Julia was going to steal her man. But fortunately for Grant, Mark Twain was his friend. He loses all his money after the war. He can make nothing work. He got involved with the Reconstruction and so forth and civil rights. So here he is at the end of his life with cancer. If you remember, Grant always smoked cigars, and here he gets cancer of the jaw, and he has absolutely no money. Can you hear me? That's all I get. So Grant, at the end of the war, after the war, he develops throat cancer, and he's absolutely impoverished. He moves up to New York in a cabin, in a small cabin upstate New York, which I believe you can still visit. And he's broke. The family's broke. His friend Mark Twain comes up. He was known, by the way, Mark Twain was known to his friends as Samuel Langhorne Clemens, and says, why don't you write your memoirs? And I can get them to the publishing company, and that'll, take care of your family. So Grant wrote 9 volumes and pushed himself in bed and died practically the day after he finished them. Twain took them to Harper's Row or wherever, and the family lived on that money for the rest of their life. But his parade was supposedly 7 miles long in Manhattan. That's a lot of this. And he's buried, as you know, in Grant Tomb. But what do you do? One of the big issues they had in New York was wounded soldiers begging on the street because they were homeless and they just had no money. And some of the authors say that you'd see these men with a crutch sitting on the street corner begging. Now, New York was not New York City until 1898. It was boroughs. And it was such a sin bin. Prostitution, gambling, corruption, murder, whatever you want. And the homeless could rent a pine plank for 50 cents at night. But they were sleeping in the park, they were all over the place. What do you do? Well, the solution came from this fellow. This is old General Winfield Scott, who was a grand old man of the army, and his monument is in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and he founded the Old Soldiers' Home. So they had a place to put the soldiers in Kearney, Newark, I think Elizabeth, all over the state, here, and then it spread to others, and the records are still out there. And when the last soldier died, they closed the home. And it was very good for these old boys to at least gather there. The other problem they had was orphans. In the Gilded Age, too, there were children who had no parents. The mother had died, let's say in childbirth. The father gets killed in the war. What do you do with the kids? And the foundling hospitals were so crooked in this age that the life expectancy of a baby was 6 years. And the babies were dying, and the children were being this is where we started the foster care program. And also, look at this. Yeah, these are the wounded soldiers on either army. It didn't seem to matter, without arms, without legs. So now the children, you can see these children holding pictures. These three were found, 3 ex-slaves. The children of slaves are another problem. What do you do with the children of slaves and the children of Native Americans? They're now accusing Carlisle Indian School of finding 152 graves. They're going to return them to the reservation. Many of them have no idea who their parents are because they are orphans. And this is the Hampton Institute. That's a great story too. Again, Civil War involved. This Iowa Indians, if you look up, I don't know where they are, they will turn up. They were 20 Kiowa Indians that were rescued from Florida. They were sent to Florida. They were committed murder. Because of murder, they were charged with murder. And they started to give them jobs to do. One of the soldiers in charge, Civil War vet, and they started to sell this, make money. They were self-sufficient. So, well, let's put them in school. Let's get them to do this. So Hampton Institute here is an industrial school. There's the picture down there of it. Up there are the children entering it. And over there, you will see Native American, African American, and Native, the Indians standing right there. I'm sorry. So there you go. They mix these kids up, train them industrially to give them a job. And the objective was to send them back to the reservation to teach. That was the idea. And to preserve their culture. And if you hear on the radio or TV that they took their names away, no, they gave an American first name, but they kept their last name, basically because you could have several tribes, and Standing Bear could be sitting next to Standing Bear, sitting next to Standing Bear. And also the fact that tribes didn't get along. They couldn't sit a Cree next to a creek because they'd start fighting. And then there was a question of hygiene. And I'll show you what happened with that. So this is, he rescued the Kiowa. This is General Armstrong, who went to Florida, rescued those Kiowa Indians, brought them up, and founded and stayed with the Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University, and produced Booker T. Washington, who was the last man to speak at Carl Schurz's funeral. And there he said about Carl Schurz, if I could die and come back, I would come back as a black man because of him. Now that doesn't sound like a big opinion, but that's it. This is the Carlisle Indian School, which is now under the gun for manhandling the Native Americans. Well, I found out all the records, all the medical records are in Library of Congress, and they're online too. I discovered that they had an influx of disease. 99 Apaches died of tuberculosis. They had smallpox, and remember, measles killed, diphtheria killed, and most of them died of disease, many of which was brought with them. Now, why did they change their clothing? Because they brought the disease with them. Oh, we're trying to Americanize. What the idea was to follow the educational precepts of John Dewey. Was anybody in school like me in the 50s? Some of us were. And we were told that we learn by doing. How many in here took home economics? Anybody? Cooking, sewing, look at the hands. Shop, carpentry, electrical wiring required because of doing. And what the idea was to teach you math by measuring wood. And my elementary school had gardening, making breakfast in school for both of us. We had to plant seeds for the garden. We had to make the projects. We had to learn how to sew. This is boys too. Then when I got to junior high, I had electrical wiring shop and wood. And I was in an advanced class. This wasn't, vocational, everybody. And so they took that precept there. There are the Native Americans coming in. And there's a picture of the amount of people who are at the school, number of people. They educated 10,000 Native Americans. And so, and now, we look at it, with hindsight. So the other biggie, this is big, is the reunions. Now, if you go to a reunion, I'm sure they're still there today, but you have to go to a meeting to prepare. Right, and that has to be in a bar. So the Army of Potomac got together, the what do you call them? Enlisted men got together, and we'll take a look at some of these reunions, whatever there was when they went. And they did the 25th anniversary of Gettysburg. Then they figured out, well, the Army of the Potomac can meet every year. Interestingly enough, the celebration for the 100th anniversary of this country was in 1876. So here they are with their reunion, marching in Brooklyn under the arch. And if you look at the arch, it's made out of wood, just like the very famous Washington Square Arch, which was originally wooden for 1876. They liked it so much, they made it out of stone. And of course, there was a large number or occasions of partying. And these are the old generals gathered late. Chamberlain is here on the left. Butterfield, the guy with the funny mutton chops, is Longstreet, and there's Sickles with his cane. We have no idea who's on the right. And they get these reunions. Story up here, General Kilpatrick was a general in Newton, and he advertises a reunion. He got more people at the reunion than they had room for, and more people than were in Newton at all. Then Kilpatrick was also known as Kill Cavalry, and you see his descendant. Anderson Cooper? That's Kilpatrick's grandson. Looks just like him. At one point in time, they had a fundraiser for Confederate soldiers who were homeless or without money. And the quote I like, "This is the Union Army of Potomac. One people, one flag, one destiny. Valor and fortitude of the Confederate dead is an ever-living heritage, not of the South, but of the entire Union. Both sides of the conflict were both fitting examples of the American soldier." And they raised money and gave it to the Confederate needy. Now, ever question how come a Confederate soldier got a pension? And people lived off those pensions for years. My aunt, who you will meet in a minute, grandfather was a Confederate soldier. They lived off his pension until 1936. Well, the old boy got home, all the young girls needing money married him. The strangest was a 17-year-old who married the 90-year-old, because that way she was caring for him. He couldn't give her money. This way she'd get his pension. But in our family, something else happened, and they all married young girls. So you wonder how those widows lived for so long. This is my family by marriage. My aunt, the fellow on the right, is my aunt by marriage, grandpa. They were all in the Georgia 11th. The colonel, you see Colonel B.M. Camp, he wasn't a colonel. He was a sergeant. He was the last man standing. There was a fourth one who deserted They all moved to Texas, homesteaded, lived off the pension, except for the brother Joe, who he deserted at Petersburg. You see, my cousin, my first cousin says they look like ZZ Top. That's something else. Anytime there was a reunion, these boys were off like lightning. They go and they put on their medals. They all got medals at the arena and zip out as quick as they could go. And this was the arts. What happened to the arts during the Gilded Age? They blossomed, particularly in New York. And there's some strange stories, as we might know. And just not much. I don't have much more time to go into all of them, but this is what we've done. This is Edwin Booth. He was at the Players Club here. Now, the Players Club is a private club on 23rd Street, Gramercy Park. And his bedroom is still there with all his costumes. His brother, you all know, is John Wilkes Booth. And so he is probably the greatest actor of the 19th century. Who are his two buddies? General Sherman and Mark Twain. And they opened this Players Club and all the actors can belong to it, put their pictures up on the wall. It's quite the place. And John Wilkes Booth's diary is there. Now, this is out on Coney Island. And I want you to look too at the price of the tickets. $125. This is for the music hall up there. Now, this is the war that went on. These were dueling opera houses. If you were old money like Mary Astor, you would have a box up there. That's one ticket. A box for 1 year was $30,000. And this is in 18 whenever. But the Astors didn't get along with the Vanderbilts. And the Vanderbilts, he offered her all kinds of money to get a box and want to listen to the opera. And she said, no way, that those people, those horrible people, they're not part of the 400. They're new money, they're crass. And this is what the Gilded Age on TV. So they went out, we're building our own. So they built the current Metropolitan Opera House. And I'm going to have my box it. You get lost. It's went on with hotels too. She built the Waldorf Astoria, that reason, competition. So, and the talent that was coming through was just amazing. This is the Brighton Beach Music Hall in 1892. You can see the waves and things going on. It eventually got washed away, but Anton Seidel was Richard Wagner's score writer. In other words, he wrote everything down for Wagner and conducted for Wagner, who came to New York. And all they did was like Tannhäuser and all the Wagner or Wagner operas. And this is where all the rich went to listen to opera in the summer. And you can have dinner too. This is the first New York Philharmonic, which was founded during this period too. The conductor was Tim Thomas, who conducted the chorus at the Liederkranz German Club, and then came over here. Carnegie opened Carnegie Hall. There was Steinway Hall, or Steinweg, as is really. And as a matter of fact, Paul Schertz was a pianist who played at Carnegie Hall when the Chopin soloist didn't show up. He was that good. And Steinway had invented a new piano during this period with the third pedal. Pianos had two pedals. He invented the third one. So there you go. And at the end, this was the last surviving veteran who died in 1956. And I let them all wave goodbye and thank you. And pardon my throat. It's really good to me tonight. So you have any questions?